Hey guys, so today I'm going to be reviewing chapters 12 through 18 with you guys. I thought it'd be easier to try and use a PowerPoint instead of the board, so we'll see how it goes. I learned this over spring break, so bear with me. So I'm going to pull up my Scarlet Letter PowerPoint. Hold on one second. Okay, cool. So you should be able to see all of this. And the reason I'm going over this, so tomorrow on Friday, we are going to have a Scarlet Letter quiz. So that's going to be from chapters, I believe, 10 through 18. Okay. Originally, I was going to give you guys an oral quiz, but I'm going to try something a little bit different. I am going to do it on my St. Mary's, but you guys are going to have different questions. So we'll see how that goes. But let's look over these chapters very briefly. So we talked with chapter 12, the minister's vigil, and that's a pretty chewy chapter because we start to get to know Dimmesdale a little bit more. We start to understand what's really going on psychologically, especially from the things that he's doing to himself physically, which is interesting because that's something that we notice and we see a lot in Gothic literature, right? This mind-body parallel and connection. We saw it a lot in the House of Usher, so on and so forth. So the setting's in early May, and he decides to go out onto the scaffold to go where Hester and Pearl had to go every day. All right, so it's a little bit symbolic because it's where Hester was publicly shamed by herself, and he's going back there. And throughout this whole scenario, he's faced with this internal conflict between remorse and cowardice. Okay, he's remorseful that he didn't stand up for Hester and stand with her, but it's also due to this cowardice that he has, right? He doesn't want society to know that he's an actual sinner, especially since he's a minister. So he's on the scaffold and he screams, right? He's like, screams bloody murder. And he's so afraid that people are going to come out of their houses and see him standing on the scaffold that his fear is very underwhelming, right? The only people that hear him scream are Governor Bellingham and Mistress Hibbins. And Mistress Hibbins is probably coming out because she thinks it's actually the call of the devil or the witches, right? So he thinks that he's become undone and he finds out that it was really nothing to be concerned about. But then he comes out, or as he's standing on the scaffold, he sees John Wilson coming, right? And he's afraid John Wilson is going to see him. Meanwhile, Governor Winthrop has just passed away. John Wilson was giving him last rites, and he was just passing through. And as he starts to walk away, Dimmesdale starts to realize he's not going to get caught, but then he starts to get really cold, right? And he starts overthinking that, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to freeze to death and everyone's going to find me on the scaffold and I'm going to be doomed, right? And we also start to see what Dimmesdale truly values, which is his pride, right? It's his stature within society that he doesn't really want to give up. So he ends up absolutely going off the chain, right? He starts laughing. He thinks this is hilarious. Okay, remember, this guy has been fasting himself. He has been abusing himself, right? He's going through all the old Roman ways of punishing yourself for sins, okay? He's losing his mind right now. He's not right. He's not healthy. So there is a little bit of a psychological problem going on because he's not treating his body well at this point. So as he's going through kind of this schizophrenic thing, lo and behold, Hester and Pearl walk through, right? And again, they're also coming back from Governor Winthrop's because Hester had to measure him for a shroud. So as they're coming in, Dimmesdale tells them, well, invites them to come up to the scaffold, which, I mean, honestly is really terrible. It's really insensitive to be like, oh, hey, lady, you know, you were only on this thing for 3 years. Why don't you come hang out with me in the middle of the night? Really awesome guy. Way to choose him, Hester. Anyways, Hester obliges and goes up with Pearl. And the three of them are holding hands. And Dimmesdale's overtaken by this sense of relief, right? He's with his family. And Pearl is 7. She's adorable. And she's like, oh, can you stand with us at noontime, right? And Dimmesdale throws out this complete cop-out, right? That the only time they're going to be able to stand together is on Judgment Day, right? And Pearl sees through this crap, right? She's like, whatever, dude, okay? And kind of blows him off. And he keeps wanting to hang on to Pearl, but Pearl says again, meet us at noontime, right? She's persistent and she knows that something's up. She knows that he is not a true character, okay? So Dimmesdale keeps saying Judgment Day, and Pearl rightfully writes him off. So as they're standing on the scaffold, this meteor kind of goes across the sky, right? And Dimmesdale sees this shape of an A. And he's not the only one, right? We learned later in the chapter that the whole town thought that it was this letter A, right? And it was like, oh, Governor Winthrop is an angel. Meanwhile, Dimmesdale's like, adultery, right? So he's standing on the scaffold. He's grasping his heart. Hester's A is absolutely illuminated. And there's Pearl, right? And she is the living symbol of what they've done, okay? And that's what unites both of them. Dimmesdale and Hester are united through sin, okay? And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So as this is going on, Chillingworth is watching them on the scaffold, and Pearl's the one that points him out. And Dimmesdale tells Hester how he doesn't have a good feeling about Chillingworth, right? And Hester is on the verge of telling him what the deal is between her and Chillingworth, but Chillingworth ends up ushering Dimmesdale back home. The next morning, he's giving his sermon. The sexton gives him his glove, and the sexton's really cool about it, right? He's like, oh my gosh, the devil must have been playing a trick thinking that, you know, you would be on the scaffold. And Dimmesdale's like, ha ha, funny devil, right? So, and just kind of writes it off. And that's when we find out too about this meteor, right? That he also saw the meteor and thought that it represented angel. Okay, so that brings us to chapter 13. And we have this another view of Hester, which is really cool. One of the things I forgot to mention before this talk, one of the things I'm going to have you guys do is I have kind of scattered questions throughout this PowerPoint presentation. All you have to do, you have to choose one of these questions that I put up here and just answer it as your classwork grade for the day. So just an FYI. Okay, so Hester isn't stupid, right? She starts to notice that Dimmesdale is deteriorating, and she becomes concerned about it. And she decides that she's going to go talk to Chillingworth and say, your secret is done. I am telling Dimmesdale about what you told me not to tell him about. And you have to give Hester some credit. Like, she's a woman of her word, right? So her character just kind of keeps on growing, and she becomes more and more saintly. Okay, she could very well just go behind Chillingworth's back and go tell Dimmesdale what the deal is, but she wants to pass it by him first. And Hawthorne notes that Hester and Dimmesdale are linked by iron. Okay, they've committed this sin, and you think about that term iron, right? These iron shackles, right? Like you're this prisoner, okay? They're both prisoners of their sin, okay? And they're having to face the consequences. But they face these consequences very differently, okay? Hester had no choice, okay? There's no way she's gonna hide that she committed adultery, okay? She became pregnant, can't really hide that very well, okay? Dimmesdale's sin is pretty easy to hide, but he is suffering from the moral ramifications of it. As I said earlier, Pearl's 7 years old. At this point, Hester started to earn her dignity back in the village, okay, because of her unyielding kindness to the poor. And the people start to see Hester in a very different light. They decide that the A no longer stands for adulterer, but instead it stands for able. And this is a quote that I am going to offer you to consider for your discussion board. So it is to the credit of human nature that, except where its selfishness is brought into play, it loves more than it hates. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, you can analyze that quote for your discussion board if there aren't any questions that appeal to you. Here's some other questions to consider. While these observations regarding Hester are on the surface, how does she change psychologically? Was there anything alarming you noticed regarding her thoughts? Okay, so even though the village perceives her as this really awesome chick, and she has a very different perception of society because of this, okay? And how does that perception change? Okay, how does her perception about society change? Okay. The whole idea of the A, so it becomes a sign of being able, right? Of like pulling herself up through her bootstraps. And a lot of you guys even noticed Hester's perseverance, right? And the townspeople believe every time now when she touches the A, she's doing it out of humility and shame. Her appearance is drastically changed, right? Her femininity, okay, her womanhood is, she's less beautiful, right? Her spirit has kind of fallen apart, and they don't really recognize that. But the thing that Hawthorne notices, that it's by choice that she's not as feminine and as beautiful. She could flip that like a switch if she wanted to, but by choice, for some strange reason, she decides not to. We know what the strange reason is, okay? She is, again, really upholding her sin. So anyway, she becomes resolved that she's going to tell Chillingworth, that she's going to tell Dimmesdale about him. And Chillingworth at this point, according to Hester, has sunken worse than Hester. Because while Hester was accused of adultery, which is a sin, right? She has transcended above that, right? She has found her place in society. Okay, she's remained a good person despite being treated terribly. Okay, and she's become kind of saintly. Whereas Chillingworth, who is this innocent, kind-hearted scholar, has absolutely plummeted because he has been overcome with revenge. Which brings us to chapter 14, Hester and the physician. So the town's talking about Hester's A being removed. And this is, Chillingworth brings this up to Hester. And Hester says, you know what, it's really not their place to take it off of me. And it really wasn't their place to put it on me. But until God decides that I am absolved of this sin, then I can take it off. Okay, so we see a little bit of that same element from Minister's Black Veil. So as Hester and Chillingworth are talking, Hester is noticing just how much Chillingworth has changed, okay? And she even says that he's looking closer and closer to the devil every time she sees him. And she ends up calling out Chillingworth that he's torturing Dimmesdale to death, okay? And poor Hester feels so guilty about this, right? She takes the blame, saying that she should have told Dimmesdale immediately about what Chillingworth was up to. Okay, so we really can't all, okay, I'll say I can't help but feel bad for Hester, right? This poor chick has this 7-year-old. She thought that she was satanic, right? She doesn't know how to raise a kid because she's ostracized. She ends up finally, you know, she's been treated terribly by society, even though she's done these great things. And she's finally welcomed back into society 7 years later. And now she should be feeling pretty darn good about herself because at least her sin is off her chest. Well, kind of. And she feels this guilt for all the things that are happening to Dimmesdale when in reality it's really not her fault, okay? So, and Chillingworth does say that, right? He argues that if she had said anything to Dimmesdale about him, that Chillingworth would have accused him of adultery and he would have been sent to the gallows. And Hester says, you know what? It probably would have been better than the hell that you're putting him through now. So again, we start to see this change psychologically in Hester. So Hester finally asks Chillingworth, hasn't he suffered enough, referring to Dimmesdale? And Chillingworth says, no, okay, he's increased the debt. Because to Chillingworth, Dimmesdale's the reason that he is the way he is. Dimmesdale is the one that has fueled Chillingworth's revenge and his desire for revenge and has made him more evil. Okay, so let's be real here for a second. The deal with Chillingworth, he just does not like to own up to his responsibilities, okay? He does not want to own up to his actions, is really the deal with Chillingworth. That's my soapbox, okay? So again, he blames him for his transformation. And I guess that was a question that I was going to ask you, and I just kind of got out of my soapbox, so just take away that question. And again, Hester takes the blame. And Chillingworth says that she shouldn't feel the blame for the revenge that he's been seeking, right? Because she's already had to suffer enough for the letter. And in that instance, yeah, Chillingworth's right, okay? Poor Hester has already had to get or has already gotten her retribution from Chillingworth from the letter. Hester despair. Chillingworth doesn't blame Hester for anything, but feels a sense of admiration. And he does admit to a little bit of blame himself, right? He says, I kind of put you in this situation. Like, we probably shouldn't have gotten married, but I just thought that we could get along, and he was so wrong. Hester encourages Chillingworth to forgive, right? But he refuses, basically saying that he is too far gone, all right? He even says, let the black flower blossom as it may. So Chillingworth has accepted that he is an evil man and he has accepted that he's just going to continue going down that path. So we move on to chapter 15, and Hester is PO'd, okay, and rightfully so. Okay, the fact that this guy just won't throw everything in and forgive, and especially after everything that Hester has gone through, right? Everyone has treated her terribly, okay, and she has kind of let that go. She hasn't necessarily forgiven them, but she definitely hasn't gone out of her way for retribution or revenge. So she does start to become very resentful of Chillingworth. And the one thing that really angers her is she feels this hatred towards Chillingworth. And that to her is the biggest sin, is the fact that she feels this hatred towards him. And she admonishes herself for feeling that way. But the reason she feels that way is she feels kind of betrayed by Chillingworth, that he recognizes they really shouldn't have gotten married, right? And she recognizes too that even within their marriage, he never really did a whole lot to help their marriage blossom and grow. Okay, so she feels like she's kind of been taken advantage of, and she has. So while all of this is going on, Pearl's outside playing in the forest, right? She's, running around the stream, she's throwing rocks at birds, and then all of a sudden, this bird becomes injured as she's throwing rocks. And we see this remorse from Pearl, okay? And she decides to stop throwing rocks at birds because she knows that she wouldn't want to be inhibited, so she doesn't want to inhibit these birds. Right. So again, we looked at Piaget early on in the novel, and we start to see more of this development of Pearl herself. So while she's waiting, for Hester, she creates this A on her chest, similar to Hester's, but it's out of seaweed instead of, anything red. And Hester sees her and she's like, oh gosh, this kid, right? And she asks Pearl if she actually knows what the letter A signifies. And Pearl doesn't, but she's also not stupid, right? She's very observant. And she says, I think it's connected to why the minister holds his heart, okay? And Hester's kind of like, does she really know what this means? Right? She's starting to get a little freaked out, but maybe she does. And she doesn't. She's very innocent, but she sees these things and she thinks about them. Okay. So Hester does debate on telling Pearl about the situation and then decides against it. And then Pearl continues to nag Hester about these two questions, right? What does the letter mean, and why does the minister hold his heart? Okay, and Hester's finally so fed up, she's like, oh my gosh, if you ask me these questions one more time, I'm gonna throw you in a closet, right? Today, that probably wouldn't fly with social services, just an FYI. Moving on, chapter 16, so forest walk. So this becomes a little more in depth as well. And Hester devises this plan, right, that she's gonna intercept Dimmesdale as he's going through the forest to to talk to some person, I forget, that kind of lives in the woods. And the big reason she doesn't want to talk to him in his office is she knows Chillingworth will be lurking, and she doesn't want him to be there when her and Dimmesdale talk. Okay. This forest is very symbolic for Hester, and one of the questions that you can chew on for your discussion board is why that might be. Also, sunshine falls on Pearl, but not on Hester. What might the sunshine signify? Okay, that's another question that's up for grabs. We're not going to talk about the brook too much today, and I'm not going to have you, well, I mean, if you really want to ask or talk about this in your discussion post, you can think about what it might symbolize. Okay, why is Hawthorne paying so much attention to this brook? Okay, so Pearl asks Hester to tell her a story about the black man. Okay, again, poor Hester, she really can't get a break with Pearl, okay? She wants to know about all the bad things within society, right? What does the A mean? Tell me a story about the black man. And Hester's like, how do you even know about the black man? And Pearl tells her, like, oh yeah, this chick was telling us stories, or telling me stories about the black man trying to get me to sleep. Ironic. And she said that you and Mistress Hibbins signed his book, and that the letter A is your black mark from the black man, right? And she looks at Hester, she's like, is that true? And Hester says, yeah, you know what? Yeah, this is my mark of the black man. Okay, and again, it's not a lie. To some extent, she did deal with the black man because she sinned with adultery. Oh shoot, sorry, I went too fast. Pearl also says that she believes the reason that Dimmesdale holds his heart is because he made a pact with the black man too. Okay, so again, Pearl does not know what Hester and Dimmesdale did, but she does recognize that they're connected in some way. Chapter 17, the pastor and his parishioner. So this is the first time that Dimmesdale and Hester have met privately in 7 years. Okay, yeah, they're on the scaffold with Pearl, but they haven't had a whole lot of one-on-one time. And Dimmesdale asks Hester if she's found peace. And she kind of evades the question, but she has. And she asks Dimmesdale if he has, and he says, absolutely not, right? He has been constantly under this inner, or dealing with this inner torment, right? And he feels with a sense of relief of being with Hester because she's the only one that knows about his sin. So he can finally kind of unload on Hester about all the things that he's been feeling about hiding his sins from the parish. And Hester reminds him that he is so well respected within society, and Dimmesdale's like, that's the problem, right? So he recognizes this hypocrisy that he's conveying to his parishioners, and that's what's making matters worse, okay? So it's really like this anthill, right? It just keeps building and building and building for Dimmesdale, okay? Nothing is going to get better until he confesses his sin. So moving on, Hester finally admits to Dimmesdale that Chillingworth was her ex-husband, right? Now, another little soapbox, and I apologize, but seriously, Dimmesdale goes off the chain, right? Says that he'll never be able to forgive Hester, and I get it. The dude is fasting, he's hardly eaten, the mind's not working too well. I get it, I totally get it. However, that is so inappropriate, if you ask me, right? This poor chick has held his identity, has kept it secret for 7 years. She has the 7-year-old daughter who continues to be fatherless, and he's going to go off on Hester? Really? Okay, think about that. So he goes off on her, blaming Hester for his condition. I mean, come on, this is, and poor Hester folds. Okay, so then I get a little irritated with Hester too, because I mean, seriously, man up a little bit. You've been raising this daughter for 7 years on the outskirts of town. You can't say that's, let's be real. Okay, but regardless, she folds, she's crying, please forgive me. And Reverend Dimmesdale's like, I mean, I am a man of God. Of course I can forgive you. Well, how gracious of you. So he ends up forgiving Hester. And then he starts to go off like, I need you to make decisions for me. I'm just not strong, right? So poor Hester has to be the tough one again. And she starts to think about this idea of them running off together, right? To leaving for Europe, Germany, France, wherever, and just starting this new life. And, oh, prior to that, sorry, I missed a very important note. Dimmesdale does recognize that the sin that him and Hester committed is nothing compared to what Chillingsworth is, right? And he rationalizes that their sin was made out of love, which is true, and Chillingsworth is made out of hate, out of revenge. And there's a lot more sin in that than there is in love, which is a very interesting way of thinking, right? Because really, in theory, in the 10 Commandments, we don't really have a whole lot that has to do with hate. I mean, murder, right? But everything else, not so much. So it's kind of interesting to hear him make this connection. Okay, hold on a second. Where was I going? Okay, right. Hester suggests them leaving together and going, and Dimmesdale says that he's too frail. But he also says that he needs to stay where God has placed him, right? And Hester kind of gets it, right? We saw that in chapter 4 with her. She stays outside of town because that was the place of her sin, right? So she kind of gets it. The other thing that's interesting in this chapter, we finally recognize that Dimmesdale and Hester both need each other because they both protect each other, okay? All right, chapter 18, A Flood of Sunshine. So this is also very interesting because we finally start to see the different perceptions of society between Hester and Dimmesdale, okay? As I said before, this novel is chock full of dichotomy, and here's another place where we see that dichotomy. And it's how Hester sees and perceives these man-made institutions, right? So like the government, religion, so on and so forth. She sees them as being absolutely hypocritical, right? And she says at one point that she's been in this moral wilderness, meaning she's been so ostracized and isolated, she's had to figure out her own morality. And to some extent, that natural morality is probably more in line with what is good versus what people are saying in the church, okay? Now, again, remember, Hawthorne had a kind of a negative perception of Puritan ideas at this point. The other thing, remember at the very beginning of the book, we talked about Anne Hutchinson, which is an illusion that Hawthorne's using, okay, who went against the Bay Colony. All right, so we start to see, and her whole vision, by the way, was this fact that we as people are naturally good. We naturally do good things when we aren't inhibited by society, okay? And we start to see Hester developing that same sort of mindset. And it's interesting to kind of think about what Hawthorne's tone is towards that mindset. Kind of seems to be positive because we see the strong sort of protagonist. Okay, so this idea of a moral wilderness, okay, we're going to talk a little bit about nature later on too, like what nature represents. And she also mentions that her isolation is what has led her to this morality, right? These ideas, shame, despair, and solitude have been her mentors, okay, because she's started to see the hypocrisy around her. So Hester is a bit more knowing and rebellious, while Dimmesdale is ruled by popular opinion, right? He can't go against these institutions because if he does, he's going to lose his credibility, his ethos, so on and so forth. The thing that's really difficult with Dimmesdale is Dimmesdale also believes that he is helping society, right? But obviously, if society knew who he really was, he wouldn't be able to help society anymore. Is that really the deal? I don't know. Dimmesdale decides finally to flee with Hester and Pearl. Okay, and this huge transition happens with Dimmesdale and Hester, right? As soon as Dimmesdale's like, yeah, we'll go away, right? Hester's like, thank God, and like flings off her A, she takes down her hair, and she's this beautiful woman all over again, okay? Which is why Hawthorne says, like, this is by choice, okay? She can flip a switch and become who she was before, right? But she chooses not to. She chooses to uphold her sin and be this credible, upstanding woman, kind of the saintly woman. Here's a question for you. Okay, so as I said, we're going to talk a little bit about nature at some point. But Hawthorne spends some time discussing nature. How does nature react to Hester and Dimmesdale's union? And how and why does Hawthorne illustrate it? So you can go that avenue, or if you want to talk a little bit about this idea of nature and how it, like what Hawthorne might be trying to illustrate with it, you can go that route too, okay? Because there is this, I'll give you a hint, there's a little bit of this innocence that's connected with nature as well. So think about that. Hester becomes excited at being able to introduce Dimmesdale to Pearl as her father, but Dimmesdale brings up this idea that he's a little bit nervous to meet Pearl and like actually be introduced as her father because children normally don't take well to him, right? Probably because they can see through him in the hypocrisy that he has, okay? Because innocents can see that, right? We see that with little children. Okay, they know that it's bad to lie, so they tell you everything more than you really want to know. That's kind of how kids are. Meanwhile, what's kind of interesting too, every interaction that he's had with Pearl has been pretty positive, right? She always gravitates towards Dimmesdale, okay? The only time that it didn't work so well is when he essentially dismissed her on the scaffold. And then we transition over to Pearl, who's accepted by nature, right? And they even recognize this kindred wildness between her and them. So again, you can even analyze that a little bit in your discussion board if you want to. She's even said to be gentler, probably because it's the only place that she's accepted. Okay, so she's playing in the woods, right? She's putting flowers all over her face, like she's a little flower child. She looks like a little sea nymph, right? She's dancing all around, and then she sees her mom without the A, right? And the hair down. And that's where we're left in chapter 18. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with chapter 19 and chapter 20, which you guys are going to read today. Tomorrow, you're going to have a quiz on those chapters. It is going to be timed. You will submit it. FYI, if it kicks you out, it's because you have other things up on your iPad that you probably shouldn't be having. Okay, so if it cuts you out, you're going to be automatically failing that quiz. Okay, so be sure you can have your notes, you can have your novel. Okay, if you want to have this lecture on your cell phone or on a laptop or on your iPad and use, you know, your iPad or your, you know, whatever for something else, that's fine too. You can use the resources. Okay, I just don't want you to use each other, right? So yeah, we'll go through that, and then Friday for the weekend, you guys are going to finish Scarlet Letter, and then we'll do a test, and I will get to that a little bit later. But anyway, if you have questions, feel free to message me. Hopefully I'll see you guys soon. Have a great day.